This is the part of the program where we'll discuss controlling light using modifiers. The first type of portrait light we'll examine and control is the main or key light. It creates the pattern and direction of light on the face. For the rest of this whole section, as well as the next 3 sections, we'll be addressing reflecting main light. On a sunny day, we have to look for ways to use light other than direct sun on the face. Here's a garage door that's being lit with hard sunlight. My back was to the garage door, and the subject stood in the reflected light of the door, with the sun to her back. As you can see, sunlight bouncing off of a white door or a wall produces a beautiful, clean spectrum of light. Since we can't haul a garage door around with us, if there's no wind, I'll use a white material reflector. I also mount it on a light stand if it needs to be higher. A white translucent Larsen reflectosol is being used as a reflector to bounce sunlight from behind the subject back to the front of the subject. And remember, the closer a white reflector is to the subject, the better it will work. Facing the subject away from the sun avoids the problem of strong light and shadows on the face. Then the subject is illuminated by whatever light is opposite of the sun. In this case, it's mostly green, and because we're in a woods, it's fairly dark. Reflecting sunlight with a white material reflector gives us plenty of clean main or key light. A silver reflector works better than a white one when it needs to be far from the subject. With the guy under a tree, the evil top light is blocked. That flattens out the light, but the remaining light is often green. That's because sunlight and other light is bouncing off of all the green foliage around him. And without the top light, that reflected green light becomes more prominent. We can correct for the green meanies in RAW, but the light is still too flat here. So I kicked sunlight back to him to overpower any green light and create a direction of main light. Another useful reflector is a silver twist open panel. This is made by Westcott. I added the counterbalance. Using reflected sunlight to add direction and color to the subject is easy and effective. It overpowers bad light. It gives a much better lit subject. But if you use this technique too early in the day, it can lead to squinting because it's really bright on their eyes. So in this case, I had her tilt her head down so she wasn't looking into the bright light as much. Here's another look at the 2 images. Probably a better answer would be to use off-camera flash. We'll discuss that later in the outdoor flash section of this program. I placed a silver reflector on a light stand high enough to catch some sunlight, so it would reflect sunlight back to the subject's face. You can also see a white reflector underneath the subject, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We can see how the subject looks before adding reflected main light. Note the absence of a good light pattern on the face as well as awful skin tones. This is because the only light on the face is coming from the blue sky and being reflected off of the green grass. See what sunlight bounced off of a silver reflector can do? The face is lit better both in modeling and color. Now about the lower reflector. Because I use reflectors and not flash, I can see that a reflector is needed to fill in the shadows.
that the main light reflector caused. If I had used flash, I probably wouldn't have been able to see that problem on the little LCD screen, as well as knowing if I gave the subject just enough or a little too much flash. When I started photographing seniors outside, I soon found out that commercially available reflectors weren't as effective or versatile as we portrait photographers needed. So I adapted an old idea from Bruce Hudson and expanded it, literally, to come up with a super reflector that I call the fuzzy flector. It's a building insulation panel from 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch thick that's either like a mirror or covered with aluminum tape on one side and silver paint and white shelf paper on the others. The exact plans are in our Fuzzy Logic book. It is simply the best reflector available for what I do.
If you can find one that has a side like this, as reflective as a mirror, that's perfect.
Since one side of the entire panel needs to be as reflective as a mirror, and sometimes mirrored insulation panels aren't always available, you can purchase some aluminum tape from a hardware store. This compares a panel that already has a mirrored side with the aluminum tape. The lighting results are very similar.
The other side has to be like this, a soft silver.
This is what the other side looks like. It's a soft silver on one panel and white on the other. Here's a scene that I'll reflect light with the various sides of my reflector to compare their strengths and lighting effects. Starting with the white panel, it reflects a broad area of light, but at that distance not much reaches the corner. The silver panel is more efficient in that its light pattern is less broad. The aluminum tape panel is much more focused. This is what the light pattern is like if you have a panel that's already mirrored. Again, because I work alone, there are times when the reflector needs to be staked down to avoid blowing away. And I do that with metal stakes poked through the gaffer's tape tabs. One panel is 4 inches shorter than the other, so it can stand by itself with one panel vertical. I'll often use the entire length of the prop stick to support both panels.
I built the prop stick with bayonet connections for two 24-inch sections and again for two 12-inch sections. The fuzzy flector is designed so the two panels can be separated for those times when you need two reflectors. Here's a diagram of the basic configurations that this thing can do. These are all in the Fuzzy Logic book. A white reflector is more affected by the inverse square law, so it needs to be close to the subject. I prefer the softer, less specular light of white for girls whenever possible. Specular light can look sweaty, and while that's okay for guys, it's less so for girls, unless you're after a particular effect, such as a workout or a sports look.
Here's the photograph without a reflected main light. Keeping the white reflector close gives us a very nice, soft look. Another use for a reflector panel is to eliminate the problem of sunlight bouncing off of green grass in front of the subject. This causes green chins, necks, and other planes of the face that are exposed to the bright, sunlit green grass. Without correcting the problem, you can see the green color cast on the side of her face. To remedy that problem, I simply overpowered the green cast with sunlight reflected off the white side of the nearby fuzzy reflector.
If the person you're photographing is far enough away from the sunlit green grass, then they'll likely be lit by blue sky, meaning their skin color will be lifelessly dull. The white side of my nearby fuzzy reflector to our right solved that problem.
The place where this girl had to be for the portrait for the best light was just behind an area where the sunlight also lit up the green grass. So I laid 2 fuzzy reflector panels over that green grass. In this before image without the panels on the ground, you can see the green on her neck, under her nose, and any other lower plane of her body. The white panels eliminated that green, but because they're quite bright, I changed the pose to drop her shoulder and tip her head down and toward that low light.